There are moments when a single verse carries more power than years of effort. A moment when a sound, spoken with intention, aligns the visible and the invisible. Ancient Jewish wisdom teaches that abundance is not chased, it is activated. And there is a Hebrew psalm that has been whispered for generations, not as poetry, but as a key that opens gates no human hand can force. If you feel that something in your life is ready to shift, that this is not just another message, but an encounter, then I invite you to support this sacred work by subscribing to the Jewish Wisdom channel. This space exists to preserve and reveal teachings that were never meant to be rushed, but lived. Before we go deeper, write this simple affirmation in the comments. As an act of alignment, I walk under divine provision. There is a reason the sages taught that words are vessels. In Hebrew, the same letters that form speech also form reality. Creation itself did not begin with action, but with sound. And God said, not because God needed sound, but because reality responds to vibration. When a psalm is spoken with awareness, it does not merely express faith, it releases order. Many people recite psalms seeking comfort, protection, or peace. But few are taught that some psalms function as spiritual contracts. They align the soul with a frequency where resistance dissolves and flow begins. This is why, in old Jewish homes, certain psalms were not spoken casually. They were prepared for, spoken at precise moments, guarded with reverence. What you are about to receive is not new, it is ancient. It was never hidden to be secret, but protected to be respected. And its power does not lie in superstition, but in alignment with divine law. In the next movements of this message, the veil begins to lift. In the Hebrew scriptures, abundance is never portrayed as random. From Genesis onward, blessing follows order. Abraham is blessed because he walks. Isaac prospers because he sows even in famine. Jacob increases because he understands timing and covenant. The Psalms emerge from this lineage, not as wishes, but as declarations rooted in divine structure. There is one psalm in particular that Jewish sages associated with the opening of gates. It is a psalm attributed to King David, a man who understood both poverty and kingship, exile and overflow. David did not speak from theory. He spoke from lived extremes. The verse begins with a declaration of trust, but not passive trust. It is active reliance. In Hebrew, the word used is not hope, but bitachon, a certainty anchored in relationship. This psalm aligns the speaker with the understanding that provision flows from source, not circumstance. Rabbinic interpretation explains that when this psalm is spoken, the soul repositions itself. Fear loosens its grip. Scarcity narratives dissolve. The individual steps out of the illusion of isolation and into covenantal flow. This is why the psalm is traditionally spoken in moments of transition, financial uncertainty, or before decisions involving livelihood. The symbolism is precise. The psalm speaks of valleys and tables, enemies and abundance, lack and overflow. These are not metaphors alone. They describe spiritual states. The valley represents constriction. The table represents expansion. The enemies are not people, but forces of resistance, doubt, and fragmentation. When the psalm declares that the cup overflows, the Hebrew does not imply excess for indulgence, but sufficiency that spills beyond the self. Abundance in Jewish thought is never hoarded. It circulates, it blesses, it becomes a channel. This understanding echoes later in the New Testament, when Yeshua teaches that those who seek first the kingdom find that all else is added. The principle is identical. Alignment precedes addition. Order precedes overflow. To apply this teaching is not about repetition without awareness. It is about embodiment. When you speak this psalm, you do not beg, you align. You speak as one who remembers their position within divine order. Begin by choosing a moment of stillness, not urgency, not desperation, stillness. Before speaking, acknowledge the source. Then speak the psalm slowly, allowing each word to settle. Imagine not money arriving, but order returning. Not objects appearing, but resistance dissolving. Write this affirmation in the comments as a second seal. I align my words with divine abundance. There is a story told among the sages of a poor woodcutter who recited this psalm daily, not asking for wealth, but for clarity. Over time, opportunities began to appear where none existed. A path opened. A connection emerged. Not magically, but naturally. Flow followed alignment. Emotionally, this teaching invites release. Release of anxiety. Release of comparison. Release of the belief that effort alone determines outcome. Spiritually, it restores dignity. You are not abandoned in a random world. You are situated within a system of meaning. If this message resonates with you, share in the comments what shifted inside you while listening. Not what you want, but what you felt. Faith is not denial of reality. It is correct interpretation of it. Action is still required. Responsibility is still sacred. But when action flows from alignment, it multiplies. If you want to go deeper into these teachings, ask for the Jewish Wisdom eBook in the comments. It was created to expand what cannot fully be spoken here. Remember this, abundance is not summoned by force, but revealed through alignment. When the soul returns to order, provision follows. This is not promise, it is principle. May your words open gates. May your path be established. May your provision arrive with peace. And may wisdom walk with you. In the Hebrew tradition, revelation never comes through noise. It comes through pattern. When the sages spoke of psalms that opened gates, they were not referring to emotion alone, but to structure. The psalm at the center of this teaching is rooted in an understanding older than kings and older than temples. The relationship between order, breath, and sustenance. In the original Hebrew, this psalm begins with a statement that defines identity before circumstance. It does not say, I will have, or I hope to receive. It says, in essence, I am positioned under guidance. This is critical. In Jewish thought, provision is never disconnected from direction. Where there is no guidance, there is fragmentation. Where there is alignment, flow becomes natural. King David composed this psalm during periods when his external reality did not reflect abundance. He knew hunger, he knew pursuit, he knew exile. And yet, he spoke from a place of certainty. The rabbis teach that this is the key distinction. The psalm does not deny the valley, it redefines it. The valley is not absence, it is transition. The Hebrew word often translated as lack in this psalm is chaser. But its deeper meaning is not poverty. It is incompleteness. David declares that when alignment is present, incompleteness dissolves. This is why the psalm is not a request. It is a declaration of structure. Rabbinic commentary explains that when this psalm is spoken, the soul aligns with the Sephira of Yesod, the channel through which divine flow moves into manifestation. Yesod is associated with connection, foundation, and transmission. When this channel is blocked, effort increases and results diminish. When it is clear, even small actions yield multiplied outcomes. This is why the psalm references water, rest, paths, and restoration. These are not poetic flourishes. They are spiritual mechanics. Water represents flow. Rest represents trust. Paths represent direction. Restoration represents correction of inner misalignment. One of the most misunderstood lines in the psalm speaks of a table prepared in the presence of enemies. In Jewish mysticism, enemies are not primarily external people. They are internal forces of resistance, fear, doubts, scarcity consciousness, inherited trauma. The table represents provision that remains uninterrupted even when resistance exists. Abundance does not wait for perfection. It manifests in the presence of tension. The oil mentioned in the psalm carries deep symbolic weight. In Hebrew tradition, oil represents consecration and continuity. Kings were anointed with oil not to elevate ego, but to mark responsibility. When the psalm speaks of anointing, it implies readiness to carry blessing without distortion. The overflowing cup is perhaps the most misinterpreted image. Overflow is not excess for consumption, but surplus for transmission. The sages taught that true blessing always spills beyond the self. If it stops at the individual, it stagnates. Flow must move. This understanding mirrors a principle later echoed in the New Testament. Give and it will be given to you, not as transaction, but as circulation. Jewish wisdom and early Christian teaching meet here in perfect harmony. What flows through you increases. What you grip tightly contracts. The reason this psalm has been associated with livelihood, sustenance, and provision for centuries is because it restores order at the root. It does not promise sudden wealth. It establishes alignment. And alignment changes outcomes over time with quiet inevitability. In many traditional Jewish homes, this psalm was recited before business decisions, journeys, or moments of uncertainty, not as magic, but as recalibration. It reminded the soul that it was not alone, not abandoned, and not disconnected from source. The secret is not volume, it is intention. Not speed, but presence. When spoken slowly, with awareness of its structure, the psalm functions like a tuning fork. It brings the inner world into resonance with divine order. This is why those who truly understand this psalm do not speak it casually. They prepare their inner posture. They align breath with meaning. They allow the words to shape them before expecting reality to respond. What you are receiving now is not merely information, it is remembrance. A return to an ancient pattern where faith is not anxiety-driven, but anchored. Where effort is partnered with trust. Where provision is not chased, but welcomed. As this understanding settles, the foundation is laid. From this place, application becomes natural, action becomes lighter, and the next movements of this teaching move from revelation into lived practice, where ancient wisdom meets modern life without losing its power. Understanding a sacred teaching without applying it is like standing beside a well and never lowering the bucket. Jewish wisdom has always insisted that revelation must descend into action, otherwise it remains incomplete. The psalm you have just encountered was never meant to live only in the mouth or the mind. It was designed to be lived through posture, rhythm, and choice. The first application begins not with speech, but with awareness. Before the psalm is ever spoken, the sages taught that a person must observe their internal state. Are you speaking from urgency or from alignment? From fear or from trust? In Hebrew consciousness, intention precedes effect. Two people can speak the same words and activate completely different outcomes. Not because of volume or repetition, but because of inner positioning. This is why the practice begins in silence. Silence recalibrates the soul. When you pause before speaking the psalm, you allow scattered energies to settle. You are signaling that you are not reacting to lack, but responding to order. This alone begins to dissolve resistance. The second application is breath. In Jewish mystical thought, breath is not biological alone. The word for soul, neshama, shares its root with breath. When you inhale slowly before speaking the psalm, you are literally drawing life force inward. When you exhale while speaking, you are releasing alignment into the world. This transforms the psalm from recitation into transmission. Now comes the spoken word. The psalm should not be rushed. Each phrase carries weight. Each word carries history. Speak it as if the words are shaping you while you speak them. Do not imagine money. Do not visualize objects. Instead, imagine order returning. Imagine confusion dissolving. Imagine your path becoming clear enough to walk without force. One of the most powerful applications of this psalm is consistency without attachment. Jewish tradition warns against emotional bargaining with the divine. You do not speak the psalm to demand outcome. You speak it to remain aligned, regardless of outcome. Paradoxically, this is what allows results to emerge. Apply this teaching in moments that seem ordinary. Speak the psalm before beginning your workday. Speak it before making decisions. Speak it before rest. In doing so, you are weaving alignment into time itself. Over days and weeks, this shifts how opportunities appear. You begin to notice doors that were always there, but previously unseen. There is also a relational application. The psalm teaches that provision flows through harmony. When relationships are marked by resentment, comparison, or unresolved tension, flow becomes restricted. This does not mean perfection is required. It means honesty is required. Speaking the psalm while refusing to address inner conflict creates dissonance. Speaking it while choosing integrity restores coherence. Another application lies in how you receive. Many people block abundance not because they are unworthy, but because they are uncomfortable receiving. The psalm gently dismantles this resistance. It reminds the soul that provision is not charity, it is structure. When something good arrives, do not deflect it. Do not minimize it. Receive with gratitude and responsibility. Gratitude itself is an application. In Hebrew, gratitude is not passive appreciation. It is recognition. When you acknowledge what already flows, you widen the channel for what is coming. Even small provision, when recognized, expands the vessel. At this point, seal this teaching by writing the following affirmation in the comments. Not as performance, but as commitment. I choose alignment. And provision follows. This declaration is not about optimism. It is about posture. You are affirming that you will act, speak, and choose from order rather than fear. One of the most practical applications of this psalm appears in moments of uncertainty, when results seem delayed, when effort feels heavier than outcome. Instead of pushing harder, return to alignment. Speak the psalm, recenter breath, restore posture, then act again, but from a different internal place. This is how ancient Jewish merchants, teachers, and families sustained resilience through exile, loss, and rebuilding. They did not control outcomes, but they controlled alignment. Over time, alignment shaped destiny. The psalm also teaches patience without stagnation. Trust does not mean inactivity. It means action without anxiety. You still plant. You still plan. you still build. But you do so without the inner friction that exhausts the soul. This principle echoes again in the New Testament when it speaks of peace that surpasses understanding. Peace is not the absence of challenge. It is the presence of order within challenge. The psalm cultivates this peace, and peace becomes fertile ground for provision. Apply this teaching to your language. Notice how you speak about money, work, and opportunity. Scarcity often hides in casual phrases. Replace complaint with awareness. Replace fear with structure. The psalm reshapes not only prayer, but vocabulary. Apply it also to rest. Exhaustion is often disguised as dedication. The psalm restores the understanding that rest is not withdrawal, but trust. When you rest without guilt, you declare faith in order beyond effort. As these practices integrate, something subtle but undeniable begins to change. Life feels less heavy. Decisions feel clearer. Resistance softens. This is not fantasy. It is alignment made visible. You are not forcing miracles. You are removing interference. And when interference dissolves, flow resumes naturally. Let this teaching live not as a moment, but as a rhythm. Let the psalm shape how you begin, how you act, and how you receive. In this way, ancient wisdom becomes modern practice without losing its power. And as this alignment deepens, the heart opens. The story becomes personal. The teaching becomes lived. From this place, emotion and meaning intertwine, preparing the soul for the deeper movement that unites faith, memory, and transformation. There is a moment in every genuine spiritual journey when knowledge stops being external and becomes intimate. When teachings no longer feel like ideas you are evaluating, but truths that are quietly rearranging something inside you. This is the moment Jewish wisdom has always honored most, because it is here that transformation begins to take root. King David did not write his psalms from comfort. He wrote them from lived tension, from caves, from exile, from uncertainty. And yet, when you read his words, you do not feel desperation. You feel grounding. This is not accidental. It reveals a man who learned how to remain aligned even when circumstances were unstable. This is the emotional center of the psalm you have encountered. There is a subtle but profound distinction between faith that reacts and faith that rests. Reactive faith speaks loudly when fear is present. Resting faith speaks quietly because it is anchored. The psalm cultivates this second kind of faith. It does not deny struggle, but it refuses to let struggle define identity. Many people unknowingly carry a deep exhaustion that has nothing to do with effort and everything to do with internal pressure. The pressure to survive, to prove, to control outcomes. Jewish tradition recognized this long ago and responded not with denial, but with structure. With rhythms that reminded the soul it was not alone in carrying the weight of life. The imagery of the psalm is deeply compassionate. It speaks of being led, not pushed. Of rest, not escape. Of restoration, not replacement. This language matters. It communicates to the nervous system as much as to the intellect. It tells the soul that safety exists, even in motion. There is an ancient teaching that says fear contracts the vessel, while trust expands it. When the vessel is contracted, even blessing feels heavy. When it expands, even small provision feels sufficient. The psalm works at this level. It gently expands the inner vessel so that life can be received without tension. You may notice that after sitting with this teaching, your relationship with time begins to soften. Urgency loses its grip. Comparison quiets. The constant measuring of where you should be versus where you are begins to dissolve. This is not passivity. It is clarity. This clarity allows you to act without the emotional cost that once drained you. Decisions become cleaner. Boundaries become clearer. You stop confusing pressure with purpose. This is one of the greatest miracles the psalm activates. Not sudden wealth, but restored coherence. There is a story preserved in Jewish oral tradition about a woman who survived displacement and loss. When asked how she rebuilt her life without bitterness, she said she stopped asking why things happened and started asking how to remain aligned within them. Every morning, before engaging the world, she recited this psalm slowly, letting it settle her inner world. Over time, opportunities emerged, relationships healed, and provision returned not as excess, but as sufficiency with peace. This is the emotional truth of the teaching. The psalm does not promise escape from life. It promises companionship within it, and that companionship changes everything. If, while listening, you felt a quiet sense of relief rather than excitement, that is significant. Relief is often the body recognizing truth. If this resonates, take a moment and share in the comments what you felt, not what you expect. This act of acknowledgement helps integrate the teaching. From this place of integration, faith becomes embodied. You no longer need to convince yourself that things will work out. You begin to sense that you are held within a process larger than fear. Action continues, but strain decreases. Effort remains, but desperation dissolves. This is where spiritual maturity expresses itself, not in dramatic declarations, but in steadiness, in showing up without panic, in trusting timing without abandoning responsibility. The psalm teaches that abundance and peace are not opposites. They are partners. When peace is absent, abundance becomes anxiety. When peace is present, provision becomes nourishment. If you feel called to deepen this understanding, to explore these teachings with greater context and guidance, we have prepared the Jewish Wisdom eBook as a continuation of this path. It expands on the spiritual foundations behind this psalm, offering scriptural insight, rabbinic interpretation, and practical ways to live these principles with consistency. To access the Jewish Wisdom eBook, simply click the link in the description of this video or in the first pinned comment. It is there for those who sense that this message is not meant to end here, but to be lived and revisited. Let this teaching accompany you beyond this moment. Return to it when uncertainty rises. Let it remind you that alignment precedes outcome, and peace prepares the way for provision. You were never meant to carry everything alone. You were meant to walk in order. And when order is restored, what you need arrives without fear. May your heart remain steady. May your path be guided. And may wisdom walk with you, quietly and faithfully, every step of the way. There is a quiet moment that arrives after every true revelation. A moment when words fade, and what remains is presence. This is not emptiness. It is integration. Jewish wisdom has always taught that when a teaching is real, it does not demand immediate reaction. It settles. It rearranges. It begins to work beneath the surface. The psalm you have encountered was never meant to impress. It was meant to accompany, to walk with you through seasons where answers are incomplete and outcomes are still forming. Its power is not dramatic. It is faithful. And faithfulness, in the Hebrew tradition, is one of the highest expressions of divine alignment. King David closes this psalm not with triumph, but with continuity. Goodness and mercy do not visit briefly, they follow. This distinction matters. Following implies movement. It implies a path that continues forward. The blessing is not static. It walks with you. This is where many misunderstand spiritual provision. They look for moments instead of patterns, for events instead of rhythm. But the ancient wisdom teaches that blessing unfolds over time, through consistency of alignment. The psalm establishes this rhythm. It does not rush the soul. It stabilizes it. At this stage, the invitation is not to do more, but to remain aware. Awareness is the most underrated spiritual discipline. When you notice your breath, your tone, your internal dialogue, you begin to see where alignment holds and where it slips. This awareness is not judgment. It is guidance. You may notice that challenges do not disappear, but your relationship with them changes. What once felt overwhelming now feels navigable. What once triggered fear now invites discernment. This is not coincidence. It is the fruit of alignment. Jewish tradition teaches that miracles are not always interruptions of nature. Often, they are restorations of order. When order returns, what once seemed blocked begins to move. Not all at once, but steadily, faithfully. There is a reason this psalm has been recited at bedsides, before journeys, at moments of uncertainty, and during rebuilding. It anchors the soul when external anchors fail. It reminds the heart that even when outcomes are unknown, presence is certain. As you carry this teaching forward, allow it to shape not only what you say, but how you live. Let it soften urgency. Let it refine intention. Let it inform your choices without dominating them. Wisdom never overwhelms. It accompanies. If you return to this psalm in the future, do not do so to force a result. Return to it to restore posture, to remember order, to realign when noise has accumulated. This is how it remains alive rather than becoming ritual. You may find that over time, gratitude becomes more natural. Not forced gratitude, but recognition. Recognition of support that appears quietly, of strength that returns gently, of provision that arrives without chaos. These are signs of alignment taking root. The closing truth of this teaching is simple, but not shallow. You are not meant to live in constant tension. You are not meant to carry fear as motivation. You are not meant to confuse struggle with virtue. Order is not weakness. Peace is not passivity. Alignment is not avoidance. When you walk in alignment, you still act. You still plan. You still build. Nothing about alignment removes responsibility. What it removes is inner violence. the silent pressure that turns every decision into a battle and every effort into exhaustion. Alignment does not make life effortless, but it makes effort humane. It allows movement without self-betrayal. It allows discipline without fear. It allows ambition without losing the soul. This is sustainable faith, not the kind that burns bright and collapses, but the kind that endures quietly. Mature trust does not demand immediate proof. It rests in process. It understands that growth unfolds in seasons, not in bursts of desperation. When trust matures, urgency loosens its grip. You stop forcing outcomes and start cooperating with order. Let this be your seal, not spoken loudly, not performed, not displayed for approval. Let it be held quietly within you, where alignment does its deepest work. Let your words carry intention rather than reaction. Let your actions reflect order rather than anxiety. Let your expectations be shaped by trust instead of urgency. When this posture becomes familiar, something subtle begins to change. You notice how often fear used to speak for you. You notice how much energy was spent anticipating loss rather than cultivating presence. And without effort, that weight begins to lift. Not because life becomes simple, but because your inner world becomes coherent. May you remember that provision is not distant or withheld. It responds to alignment. It moves when resistance softens. It appears when the soul is no longer fragmented by fear. Provision does not always arrive dramatically. Often it arrives quietly, in timing, in clarity, in the right connection, appearing at the right moment. May you remember that peace is not a reward for those who succeed. It is a foundation for those who trust. Peace does not wait at the end of the journey. It belongs at the beginning of each step. When peace is present, decisions become cleaner. When peace is absent, even abundance feels heavy. May you remember that wisdom walks slowly, but it never leaves. It does not rush you. It does not pressure you. It remains near, steady, patient, waiting for you to move at the pace of truth rather than fear. Wisdom does not compete with noise. It outlasts it. And when you speak the psalm again, may it not feel like repetition or routine. May it feel like returning home, returning to order, returning to a place within yourself that remembers how to trust without forcing, how to act without panic, how to receive without guilt. May goodness follow you, not as a fleeting moment, but as a pattern that unfolds with time. May mercy accompany you, not as exception, but as presence in every season. May your path be steady, even when it is not straight. And may wisdom remain with you, not as a concept you recall, but as a living presence that quietly guides your steps in faith. If this teaching has spoken to you, and you feel the desire to deepen your understanding, to study these principles with greater clarity and continuity, know that you are not meant to walk this path without guidance. We have prepared the Jewish Wisdom eBook as a companion to this journey, expanding on the foundations you have encountered here. Inside it, you will find deeper exploration of the Psalms, the structure of alignment, and the practical wisdom preserved through generations of Jewish tradition. It is designed to be revisited, studied slowly, and integrated into daily life. To access the Jewish Wisdom eBook, simply click the link in the description of this video or in the first pinned comment. There you will find the material prepared for those who sense that this message is not meant to end here, but to continue shaping how they walk, act, and trust. Let what you have received today remain with you, not as inspiration alone, but as alignment, not as emotion alone, but as order. And may that order gently, faithfully, shape the path ahead.